Thank you. So primarily, there's just a couple items that'll be going to the board that we can chat about for the math adoption. The primary thing that I wanted to talk about today was kind of our plan and process and timeline for looking at the whole reopening of school, and what types of teams we're putting together to bring recommendations and to get your feedback on how you want it to flow. It's feeling a lot like master planning kind of process, to bring components to you probably periodically so it all doesn't come at once. So I'd love to get your feedback and have us sort of map out a plan of communication, since nearly all of it except the finance pieces will go to finance, but the other components will probably all come through this team. And then you all can help figure out how to communicate to the rest of the board and what type of pace we'd like to do. So maybe we could do some of the logistics just as the reminders for the math adoption first. That's in, if you're in our board docs, the math adoption component that will come as a full resolution now. And then there's also a NIF-STEM textbook adoption that's kind of attached to that. And the NIF-STEM has always had a little bit of different kind of pacing of their math. So that will be a part of the adoption process this time, for specific materials for them. And then fire safety, also, we're starting that College and Career Academy fire safety program. Not starting it, but bringing materials for that, starting the adoption process for that, and which includes a graded course of study for 2 other pathways. That is sort of a normal process that we bring to board for our college and career academies. They're on a cycle of adjusting their graded course of study. We have to review it periodically through the year. So that will always be a process that will come. So that we'll finish the math adoption for our regular materials that we've been bringing and reviewing, and then NIF-STEM and fire safety and the graded course of study for the pathways listed there. So do you have any questions on those items? The other items are pretty routine, except for our bigger math adoption. And then the other just quick things before we talk about the reopening process is the College and Career Academies. They do have an update on here, and I thought you might want to take a look at it if you're at your computers now, or you can do it later, that they do give some information. If you remember the last time we met, or it might have been 2 times ago, our seniors who were identified on track to graduate, they got the multiple options that they could choose on how to finish out their school year. One of those was they could stay in their courses and just finish it out in a regular format in their virtual classes. And some students chose to do that because they wanted to make sure that their GPAs were strong and continue to work on that. Then the second option was if they were in IB or AP classes that have the bigger exams that they need to work through, they could shift out of their regular core classes and just focus on all of that final preparation in those advanced tested courses, or finishing their big IB projects or doing any of the major projects. They could just focus on that the last, it was about 27 days, 28 days of school. And then the third option was to do the 3 E's where they could move away from their regular courses and exclusively focus on all of the activities remaining around enrollment, enlisting, or employment. And they had to pick one of those 3 E's. And then Rachel Teka's staff ran or is running 3 Google Classrooms around those 3 E's and individualizing what students need to make that final transition. So for example, if a student was going on to college and already knew where they were accepted, they're helping to make sure they're getting all of the paperwork done. They have finished all of their financial aid. They're doing any other scholarships that they wanted to apply. They're filling out all their housing, information for college, like all the millions of things that have to be done to finalize that transition. They're focusing on that. If your employment, if you pick the employment Google Classroom, then you're making sure your resume is up to date. You're starting to apply to all of the places they're setting up virtual interviews. That's their focus. And so it kind of lists the types of content in those 3 areas, but it's all individualized with mentors kind of supporting students as they work through that final preparation. So it's really actually pretty cool. And the neat thing is what's happening in there, we're learning quite a bit about what's really resonating, especially in this virtual environment, that we can apply through the rest of the year, because it's all through our career cruising software that is all the huge platform that we use for all of our College and Career Academy transition work. And so we're learning a lot about what resonates with kids, what doesn't, what can be done independently, what needs support that will help inform us for the long term. Do you have any questions about that whole 3 E's process?
Not a question.
Hello, Miss Autry, too.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
No, just a quick comment. I love the offerings. I think they're wonderful. I think they're exactly what kids would need.
Yeah,
right. Any and each of those things in those separate categories would be a wealth of information for kids trying to navigate through those things. So wonderful stuff.
Yeah, it really is. It's kind of what we continue to say during this APS connected learning time is we're able to learn so much during this time, try out a lot of different things. We're actually, so many, we've had to shift the way that we approach so much of the content and so much of our services, that there's some things that we're never going to want to go back, right? And this may be one of them that, and we all know seniors and have either raised seniors or we have seniors in our families where the toughest thing for seniors is that last quarter of school. And sometimes it even starts before that, but it is so hard to have seniors stay fully engaged and to finish out strong. And this may be something that we'd like to think about and look at for the future, or to figure a way to free students up, maybe while they're doing some internship hours, that we also have them in some type of 3 E's course where they are deliberately finishing all of that final transition that every single parent would love for a kid to have done and finished. So they're not just all of a sudden in June trying to figure out what the heck they're doing, find a job, that we work through all of that ahead of time. So I'm really excited about what this has sort of forced us to do creatively, and what we're learning from it.
Well, it's nice to turn it to our advantage, right? We find ourselves in a set of circumstances and we're using these circumstances and finding out ways to better help the kids.
Right.
So the whole lemonade out of lemons, I love it.
Right. Our superintendent, his famous quote that we're all saying all the time, and this is not, he doesn't own this quote, but he's using it a lot, is, don't waste a good crisis. That this is like, we're in a crisis, but let's take advantage of it. Let's learn from it. Let's put some things in place that maybe we wouldn't have been able to do because of the flexibility that the state's given us now. And I think this is a perfect example of that.
I'd just add, I can't imagine how helpful it would have been to have somebody going over those last minute college things. I mean, as somebody who is a first year or a first graduate out of my family, nobody really understood the process, right? So just having somebody else to walk you through it rather than just kind of punting and going on your own. And that's huge too. And you didn't mention much about the Enlist. Do you have any tidbits you can give us about what they do in that?
Yeah, the Enlist, some of that is focused on taking the exam, that entrance exam, or the kind of developmental placement exam that they use for the military, and then making sure they understand clearly the options that they're signing up for. Some had already signed up and had already enlisted, but then some were still in the exploratory stage. So it's been kind of nice that those approaches are different depending on where they were in the decision. And then also linking it to, if the long-term goal is also college and wanting credits and moving towards that, then how do you use enlistment to help support that and make sure that you're making choices that help you in that pathway? And so our ROTC, folks, our junior ROTC, and our the folks that you've seen who always bring the students for the pledge and things like that, they're the ones kind of running this class and have been incredibly helpful to help build support for the students. We may want to, maybe at a board meeting when we're closer to the end of the semester and end of the year, we may want to have a representative from each Google Classroom come and present to the board and talk about how these courses were helpful to finish out the year. It might be really nice to hear from them. I'm sure Rachel could set something up.
Yes, I did have a question and a comment, and I'm sorry I came in a little late, so you might have answered it already. I think you mentioned that Rachel was actually handling those 3 E's. So, I mean, how many seniors do we anticipate graduating, and how many people are Rachel working with as far as giving that support in the 3 E's? Is there a team, or are the regular counselors helping out with that?
Yeah, she has staff that are running each one of those 3 Google Classrooms. The first one, the employment one, is Dreama Whitfield is running that one with support from, we have staff in the high school called Leaders of Campus Support, who do all of our extracurricular support and clubs and things like that during the day, and student leadership opportunities. So they're supporting Mrs. Whitfield in that course, as well as our academy coaches that help our college and career academies in each high school. And then Mrs. Womack is doing the enrollment one, and with the same support from the Leaders of Campus Support and the academy coaches. And then Colonel Lionel Urquhart is our junior ROTC instructor who's taking lead along with our other instructors on the enlistment one. And I have, if I can find it while we're here, I have some data, but I'm not positive I'll be able to find it, but I can always send it to you, that where the counselors were filling in how many, as the kids were signing up, how many went to each of those 3. We have about, every year we have somewhere around 1,200 to 1,300 graduates across the district. So that, but they all weren't eligible for those 3 E's. You had to be identified as on track to go into the 3 E's Google Classrooms. If you weren't on track, then you had to stay in the course to finish out and to make sure you're earning the credits, most importantly. And then some students also had to make sure they were finishing the credits that they were sitting in, plus some maybe were behind and had lost a credit, the year before, and were still trying to do credit recovery. So some students were in that. But I'm not finding it real quickly as I'm searching, but I can send that to you to kind of show you the breakdown of how many kids were in each of those different buckets.
I think it's a really great practical application of something that's really needed. I like to see that, stick with the district. And I forget which meeting we were in. Someone even talked about a fourth E, the entrepreneurship. And
Yeah.
I think when we think about our college and career academies, we also want to develop that aspect of things too. So I think that would be something to, consider, keep in mind moving forward as well.
Right. Yeah, I think we did talk about that last time. Rachel believes that entrepreneurship, we should put that across almost every single pathway, that it shouldn't be a standalone, because like the welding pathway and the business pathway and the cosmetology pathway, they all need entrepreneurship also. So it should be embedded in everything. Although we do have some of our pathways end up with more of an emphasis on entrepreneurship, especially our business pathways. But it's interesting, it would be interesting to see how, as we think about the 3E separately, whether students would say, well, I don't want just employment, I want to run my own business, and they would separate themselves out to some kind of entrepreneurship, or I want to invent something, or I want to, stand on my own doing something. It would be interesting. Or we build it, in or some way. All right. We also have an update attached regarding the Family Resource Center update too, that Carla provided, just to make sure that you're aware that the Robinson Family Resource Center, that was really fully up to speed, is still providing lots of supports. And we were just at the point of Helen Arnold Family Resource Center opening. So they weren't, it's not quite the same that they're able to do the full services because they were just opening, but this document summarizes all of kind of the services that are being provided through Robinson primarily, and some through Helen Arnold. And then we'll be able to, launch Helen Arnold even more so once we get situated. But it's kind of a nice wide range of services, similar to the Family Resource Center at the I Promise School that is now being provided. We wish, and I will say this every time we talk about Family Resource Centers, that to me, this is the crux of everything that we need to do in our future. When we think about coordinating care for families, this model of having somebody on site who's coordinating all of those different community-based agencies that are in that neighborhood, or based on doing needs assessments of the families, meeting those needs, because every neighborhood's going to be different and unique, and it needs to be. And then working with any existing neighborhood groups, all of that is exactly what we need to be able to get to that more coordinated kind of care for families. And that's what we've been driving to. And I'm hoping that this COVID, time in our life doesn't disrupt that path that our community was on to continue to support the expansion of the Family Resource Centers. Because the superintendent and Carla and I believe that that's sort of the ticket for this next wave that we need to do, where it's not just kind of loose partnerships and where we can get some partnerships, that's great, but they ebb and flow every year. That this is a much more systemic, coordinated, embedded process that we support wholeheartedly. And everywhere I go, I keep saying that's where we need to be prioritizing in terms of the community and our partnership. And when we go through things like this, it's perfect that Robinson has somebody who's still working and providing supports to the family. That's exactly what we want. And we want the support to continue through the summertime for our families as well. So that's my little commercial and pitch for that.
Quick question related to that. What are the expansion plans for those kinds of things throughout the district?
We have kind of a 5-year vision that with United Way on where we would like to and how we would like to expand. We decided to start with the 2 and work out the bugs and then kind of dive into the expansion. Now, hopefully this won't take us off track in, the dream would be to have this in every single neighborhood, either in every single elementary, or we were talking about looking at a middle school also that could serve and support the elementaries as well. But we wanted to kind of pilot and start with the 2 to just see how it goes. What are the best strategies in terms of setup and community outreach, and then do a full-blown expansion plan. It is, it's a couple $100,000 per site to be able to really get them up and running and staffed and working. And that will be, our challenge as a community is to prioritize the funds to support each of the sites. If we could, at a minimum over these next 5 years, get 1 per cluster. But my vision would be that we're able to expand and go even deeper than that, either through have it at the middle school that also serves elementary through family liaisons that are housed, or that we go ahead and just try to get them in as many, especially the high need elementaries that we have in the city. That would be the dream.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, our last and most important topic is the timeline and kind of the process for our reopening and recovery action planning process. I think I brought to you 1 or 2 meetings ago sort of the framework to say that we'll have similar to, but it's not going to be nearly as long and in depth because we don't have that time. But we have started some teams to formalize some recommendations. So for example, and this is all collaboratively, AEA is providing the primary collaborative leadership with me to help put together the teams. But one, for example, that has been in motion already is a health advisory team that Deborah Folk has with members of, Department of Public Health, Children's Hospital, some of our medical partners, to inform kind of everything that we've been doing, even to the point of when secretaries are going into the buildings and custodians, when we brought them back to do some additional work, what are all the health and care type things that we need to have in place beyond the social distancing? What's the cleaning routines that we need to do? What kind of masks do we have to make sure? All of the things that you can imagine and that you've heard us talk about at the superintendent has talked about at the board meetings. We have a team of health advisors that have been helping us with all of that. That team will continue to help advise as we continue every week to get information from the governor's office and from the Department of Public Health and from ODE on what will have to be in place for us to reopen in the fall. And so we know that we may get some skeleton kind of guidelines from the state, and then our local health department is going to have to help us operationalize. They have been focused on how can we have safe graduation? You heard the superintendent give an update on graduation procedures, and the health advisory has helped us map out how can we bring kids in to walk the stage, and what do we have to have in place, and how many adults can be in that location. So that's one of the teams, for example. There's a logistics team that Deborah Folk and Howard Lawson will run. It's logistics and technology. And they will be looking at bus transportation and child nutrition and technology needs. So depending on, as we get guidance from the state, they will then put kind of a plan in motion on how we would transport kids, how we would feed kids, and how we would make sure that the technology is maintained for whatever model that we're able to put in place for reopening. Ryan Pendleton, as you know, has a finance team, and he's also looking at some of the federal dollars with the CARES Act. So he has an advisory group that's going to help with how to apply some of the stimulus money and what that's going to mean. So he'll have a team that will work to help prepare us for the fall. And then there's athletics, which you can imagine. A lot of that is governed by the Ohio High School Athletic Association, but there's also, we have to decide our own procedures, that if the state says, yes, we'll have fall sports, and we've got to figure out what are our own internal rules for practices and for games, and are we going to have fans or not, all of those provisions. So Mark Black and Joe Vasilati have already put together an athletics team that will look at that. There'll be an extracurricular group. Megan Mannion will be leading about clubs and theater and all of the other extracurriculars. So that'll be a team. And then the most important, Pat Shipe and I are co-leading the team around the school models, reopening school models, and instructional recovery. That's one team that will bring ideas and recommendations to you that, based on what guidance we get from the state, to say, here's how we think we should reopen. Is it that all kids are going to be able to come back, but we're going to have to do some kind of social distancing? Or is it staggered schedules like some of our international colleagues are doing as they're reopening? Some kids come on Monday, Wednesday, and other kids come Tuesday, Thursday. Those models, we'd like to kind of look at the logistics once we get better guidance from the state, and put maybe a couple models together and bring that through this committee. And then the last thing before we talk about the communication then is that same team. We're also going to be, because it's dependent on the model, we'll be talking about instructional recovery. So we already have our learning specialists and teams of principals and teachers are kind of looking at what standards may have been lost this past spring, and then figuring out a plan of recovery this summer and the fall on how we would make sure that we recover that before we really head full-blown into this next year, into new content. So both of those will be, we're starting that conversation on Thursday to look at some models. We put out a survey, as you're aware, an open-ended survey for teachers and other educators to give us ideas about the models. And I think I went over that last time with you, that the most kind of popular ideas are some kind of staggered schedule. If the state tells us that we can't have 28 kids or 27 kids in a classroom, to do some kind of staggered or to spread classes out creatively in some way. So that's kind of the different teams that are meeting, trying to get a handle on what the possibilities are for the fall. Most importantly for us is, almost all of this lies with our instructional policy committee, except for the finance part. Even the logistics is going to have a huge impact on the school model that we pick. We're learning that busing is going to be, how we always tease that the busing and child nutrition kind of rules the world in schools. Well, in this case, it's a huge barrier and huge impact on our ability to move kids around to get them to school if there's going to be significant restrictions on how we transport. So when you think about that kind of school models and being brought, can we just have sort of an open conversation on the process that you would see on how we bring early ideas and drafts and start to kind of sort through the different options, knowing that things are going to ebb and flow, just like they did this year. We may think these are the guidelines today, and then next week it may completely change. So what are your thoughts?
Some of it may have already changed today. Today's news is breaking even as we speak. Just before I sat down, I saw that California's entire collegiate system is going online next year. They're not having colleges come back at all. And in listening to the Senate testimony this morning, there was a lot of pressure put to bear on giving guidelines from the CDC and the federal government to the states for schools. I was really surprised at how much pressure there was on that, actually. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah.
There were some things with buses, for example, that I really hadn't even thought of. I had a conversation with Deb Folk. It had more to do, it started out with as a food conversation. And as things sometimes do with Deborah, it went a different direction. Sometimes it's just that she can redirect me from what I really wanted, I think. But anyway, she was telling me about, one of the things I hadn't really thought about was buses and charter schools. I mean, I was already worried about, okay, how on earth do we stagger all our kids so we can get them to school, even if they're only every other day? If we can only put 10 to 16 kids on a bus, depending on how big they are and spacing and stuff. And my mind was already blown by that. And then you throw in the fact that not only do we have to transport them, but we have to get all the private and charter kids there as well, because the state hasn't changed that rule.
Right. And they could be on a different schedule.
Right. And
the law, it used to be that they had to be on our same kind of start time, end time and schedule. But now they can be on different schedules, which makes it even more complicated.
Well, she gave me a description, for example, of a neighborhood. I believe they all go to Hatton. And there's a housing development over near Hatton where we pick up 60 kids. And they all go to Hatton. Pretty easy. It's 2 buses. You pick up the kids, you get them to Hatton. And she said if it's 10 kids per bus, that instead of 2 buses, now we need 6 buses to get the kids from Hatton. And that doesn't even account for the fact that not only do we have to get those kids to Hatton, but there's probably kids in that neighborhood that need to go to, such and such Catholic school and so-and-so's Imagine Academy.
Or they go back and they get the, second, either the middle school kids and then the elementary. So now if they're doing 2 or 3 runs to get kids, now you can't accommodate your secondary kids. Yeah.
It's a logistical insanity. And I don't know how, she says she wakes up at 4 a.m. a lot and just writes stuff down, which I think we all do a little bit of. As far as bringing it to board, I don't know if I don't want to get in the way. I don't want us to get in the way, but I don't know even if we just have listening ability when there's some of these meetings, maybe it might be helpful if we're at least, maybe if we could just hear. I don't know what some of the conversation that's happening, because like I said, those were things that even haven't been around for a while. And even, having run some scenarios in my own head, it was like a moment. And I feel like that it would be nice to not have that at a board meeting. You know what I mean? To kind of be gently fed. Yeah, but if you thought about 6 buses going to this house, you know what I mean?
Right. all the other logistics that come to
Right.
bear when you're in the middle of those, right? Like instructionally, we can have the best ideas in the world, but then that one bus rule could blow up everything because it'll be
Right.
impossible to get to that. And it's not even just the rule, it's the rules plus any safety precautions that obviously we want to abide by, but
Sure.
that could completely blow up any kind of plan that we come up with.
And then I guess the last piece and then I'll hush, would be you briefly mentioned when you were going through the committees, did you mention communications? I think you started to say something about, so that's going to be the other big piece, right? Is the uncertainty of all this makes us all crazy anyway. And the changing,
I think
communicating with parents.
I forgot to mention, we do have a family communication and engagement team that will kind of take the parts and pieces. We also have a mental health and transitions team.
Oh, okay.
I forgot those other two. So mental health and transition is sort of recovery in terms of mental health and helping with whatever model we end up with. What transitions do we have to do to prepare kids for that? And if you think about, we're not going to have a normal transition from 5th grade to 6th grade or from 8th grade to 9th grade like we have. There's some, but what do we need to do to help with that in this virtual world also? So that's one team. And then the family engagement is taking all of the parts and pieces that will be put together from these other teams and then packaging it in a way to make sure the voice, there are parents on the other teams. So it's not that they'll be in a vacuum, but it's like, how do we make sure that families are understanding and that their more collective voice is heard through all of this as we go through? But there are parent representatives that are slated for most of the other teams, I believe. And students, student voice. Some of it is student focus groups to make sure we get a little broader view instead of just one kid thinking, they can represent the world. That will have focus groups also, especially for the school model and instructional recovery team. That'll be really important. And the logistics team is going to be really important also. So I think what I hear is opportunities to be able to, especially it might be a good time, similar to the master planning time, when the teams are coming together and reporting out, like, here's our journey where we've been. And we do that periodically. So it's not just at the end, but there'll be joint meetings where each of the teams will be reporting out, here's what our progress is, here's what we're thinking. And some of these, they're not going to, we don't have the luxury of 10 meetings. I mean, this might be 2 meetings you have to come up with a plan for extracurriculars or something like that. And then some of the details we can work out over the summer once decisions are made. But this isn't going to be, it's May 12th. And we've gotten a lot of the homework done ahead of time, but this is going to be more focused and joint, kind of, at least to get the framework down, and then the details can be worked out through the rest of the summer. But we're going to be seeking, within the next 3 weeks or so, month at the longest, we're going to need to have the framework done for us to then bring to you, to then bring through the board to say, here's what we want, at least one framework, and we may bring 2 models to detail out instead of just going with one. We may keep, it might even be 3. I think I mentioned this to you before. We may keep forever a full face-to-face model ready just in case that for some reason we're allowed to do that. And then we may keep the full APS connected learning model in place in case we need to do that, even if it's 1 school or 2 schools, that we're going to have that in place. And then the middle option will be, what if we have to do social distancing everywhere and smaller class sizes everywhere? how could we accommodate that, and kind of detail out all three options. That's what I'm anticipating will come out of this, because I don't even think within 2 or 3 weeks we're going to know. The universities are having to make the decision right now, and this is even sort of late for them because families are making a decision about whether they send their kids, and so they're being very pressured to make that decision. I think, I don't know if we're going to know definitively within 2 to 3 to 4 weeks what the state is going to say is going to happen in the fall. So I think we'll have to be more flexible, if that makes sense.
So I wanted to just make a few points because, coming from my background, I'm always really big on the community piece and the family piece, and they were equally as affected by all of this as well. And I know you mentioned parent reps on these teams. I am just very, I think it's very important that their voice is included in, how things are going to roll out moving forward. They might have a lot to offer from their perspective. Just that average everyday parent, as well as the students. So I know it sounds like, the district is leading, most of those teams. The folks that are going to be most impacted by it, the families and the students, need to have a voice. And I think them also seeing that their voice and opinions are reflected in whatever's presented moving forward, I think is going to be important for us as well. Parents can look and
absolutely.
Yeah, I felt that way. That was included. So I just wanted to mention that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I agree. And I think between Carla, who's leading the family engagement team, and then her representation of the families that she's getting on all the other teams, I believe that voice will be there, but I know in Carla's plan, she's talking about doing focus groups and surveys that will help inform everybody so that we get a broader, because even when you get 1 or 2 or 3 representatives, usually it's an elementary rep, a middle school rep, and a high school rep. That's still a lot when you've got 21,000 kids, and that represents about 13,000 families. That's a lot for one elementary, parent on one team to represent all the elementary parents. So I think no matter what, we have to make sure that we're giving an opportunity for a broader, through surveys and focus groups, to make sure we're informing that way as well. Other questions or comments on, to do Ms. Mansfield and Ms. McKittrick, especially for it to come through instructional policy in terms of, just doing like regular updates on the work at every meeting. We just kind of have a standing agenda item on, here's the update on where we are, here's what models are emerging, that kind of thing.
Like I said, I really like the idea, even if we don't have, I don't want us to have a board member voice at a meeting, maybe just like we were for master planning, right? We were just another one of the people listening to and saying, hey, have you thought about, right? We weren't, bringing the hammer. It was just advice. If there's a way to do that, I don't know that either one of us really have time or could fit it into our schedule, but it can be like we did with master planning, where when we could come, we came. Different board members, served on that. I know Reverend Walker and Tim did. It wasn't all just instructional policy. We did it. We swapped out and things like that. I don't know. It might be interesting.
That would be absolutely fine. Yeah,
I think that might be helpful, because then it's not all coming to us even like this, and maybe we can trickle the information. I mean, it's harder. We don't run into each other like we did, right? I'm not going to run into Diana at a luncheon or Valerie and be able to say, hey, I just went to this meeting and here's what I found out. Unfortunately, those are the pieces that those ad hoc conversations that we could have as board members are are not as available, right? Unfortunately. The only other thing that I wrote down in my notes is building confidence is going to be tough. I think that's that communication piece you mentioned, and even that Diana talked about too, is people are going to be afraid.
Yeah.
Some people aren't. Some people are going out there gangbusters. I cannot tell you. I drove past Hobby Lobby and I've never seen more of a crowd. It looked like it was Christmas. But there are going to be people that this is their most precious, the most precious thing in their life, and making sure that we're confident and that we keep that face forward, that we're confident about what we're doing with our partners at the health department.
Right.
I think it's going to go a long way too.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really good point. On the bottom of the document where we've started to kind of look at the survey data on what types of models that our teachers were thinking about, we put on the bottom of that no matter what that middle model that we would bring as a proposal to you all, that we're going to have to accommodate an increased number of families in either the APS online or in APS connected learning, and continuing to do what we're doing. Because I think no matter what model we pick, there's going to be some families who are going to say, for right now, and it might be just the beginning of the year, it might be until they see what happens through the winter, it might be the whole year, that their comfort level will be that we just want to continue with the learning from home. The fortunate thing is we have the capacity to be able to accommodate that. And we already have the option with APS online, or we've proven ourselves in terms of the APS connected learning that we could still continue, as long as we build that into the plan, to have some teachers dedicated to that if we find an increased number of families who want that option. So we have a little footnote at the bottom. No matter what, we should probably assume that we're going to have increased numbers of families who are going to want that option. And I think we're all committed to wanting to be able to provide that. I just read an article last night on that was summarizing some of the other countries, kind of updating what we've been tracking in Sweden, Switzerland, South Korea, China, the different countries that are starting to open first, the schools. And they all are finding, except I didn't see it in China's summary, but the other countries are finding that some families are just choosing to homeschool, is what the article said. Now, we have homeschooling, but we would definitely prefer, and I think it's a better service for the families to be able to go ahead and do either our APS online or our APS connected learning, because we've got the digital curriculum already since we've shifted to that. So that's a much easier and kind of more robust service that we were able to provide. So yes, and that level of that may be confidence, and it may not have anything to do with confidence, Ms. Mansfield. That may just be, this is the best choice for our family right now, based on all the circumstances and their knowledge, and that's what they want to do.
Well, and it may be good for some teachers too, right? Because some of our teachers might have health concerns that make coming into a classroom difficult. We've got a lot with underlying conditions, and
Right.
maybe it gives an option for somebody who might otherwise have had to go on a disability or go on unemployment to continue to teach for us. And
Right.
we've got some really good ones who I know who've got terrible health issues. So,
and I think we mentioned the last time we met that it appears, and if you listen to the testimony this morning from the health officials, that it may not be that the whole district has to, shut down and learn from home for a while. It may be classroom by classroom, or it might be school by school. So the more we can have that APS connected learning kind of infrastructure already there, either by some teachers that are doing that, all the time, or even when the teachers are face to face, they're using their Google Classrooms and Google Meets and setting up all their assignments through this digital platform that we've been using, then if you're all of a sudden within 24 hours told you're home for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, it's okay, it's seamless, and we can just move right into that. And then when the quarantine is done, then they can just move right back. And it sounds like we're going to need to be that nimble. At least when you listen to the health officials, it sounds like we're going to have these ebbs and flows and contract tracing that's going to impact, and might be just 3 kids in a class or 1 kid in a class. And the more we can just seamlessly put them in APS connected learning and back, it'd be great. And we can do all of this May 12th. We can build this. Normally, I think I've said to you all, this would be like a 1 to 2 year plan for us to be thinking about completely shifting school models. And here we are, May 12th. But I feel like what we've been able to pull off since March, 14th, March 15th, I think we can do it. And I think we've got the collaboration and all the partnerships in place to be able to figure out some good plans that will be flexible and nimble enough. But it's going to be a fast pace. That's all I know. We're not going to be able to deliberate for days and days and spread this out. We're going to have to be moving pretty quickly and trusting that we can figure out the details underneath kind of a framework that we would like to be able to bring within the next, I would say give us 4 more weeks, and we have to basically know what we're doing for the fall. And then we'll give you the details in July and August, but at least the framework has to be there, if that sounds okay, timeline wise. So kind of the middle of June, all the models are done and we know what we're doing.
And then the governor comes in and says something totally different. And, yesterday you didn't know you could get a tattoo this week, but now you can get a tattoo this week. So, things are changing really fast, and we still don't know if we can go camping, but doggone it, we know we can get our tattoos. And it came fast today. So,
I know.
I have good planning. So,
Right. We've talked about that as you watch everything open up, it does feel like we're heading towards, we're going to be doing face-to-face in the fall, some degree. I think the some degree is what we have to figure out, and what kind of the social distancing rules will be when we do that. But we're pretty confident we're going to be able to do some, even if it's small groups for kids who need it the most, or we definitely, are prioritizing our students with disabilities and students with more significant disabilities to make sure their services, we're pretty confident we're going to be able to figure some face-to-face services. It's just how much I think is going to be the key for this next month to figure that out. Any other questions? What I'll do is, talk to the superintendent and cycle back. I'll probably, just do a little summary email to everybody in terms of, the schedule. We're meeting with some of the teams this Thursday and the chairs just to kind of figure out the logistics and a schedule. So I can probably email you and say, here's what's happening when, and here's, a way that we can do invites out to have people join, because it'll all be virtual. We won't totally blow up every single, team, but maybe we can figure out what would be reasonable so that you don't get overwhelmed, because it'll be, I think it's 7 or 8 teams that are probably going to be meeting, very condensed in the next 2 to 3 weeks. I think the most important thing for you all, besides the finance things that you're already a part of, especially for Ms. Autry and Mr. Bravo, is the school model team is probably going to be really, really important. I think that's the major, especially for instructional policy, because that's where I'll be spending all my time. And then if we'll figure out the logistics team and things like that for Deborah and the health team, I can let you know about that. But especially for Ms. Mansfield and Ms. McKittrick, the instructional policy or the school model and instructional recovery, I think is going to be the sweet spot for you all.
Well, and again, just making sure that, and maybe Patrick can weigh in on this too. I want to make sure that we're not coming in with a hammer. This is just us being a part. This is not making board decisions at that point. It's just, you know, saying, hey, have you thought about this? Or hey, have you thought about that? I mean, when we're doing that, it's a little different than when we're meeting as a board. You're just a voice in the committee listening and.
Right. Right. The way the master planning kind of process has worked great, because this is hearing from the people closest to the work, you know, the parents, the teachers, the custodians, the bus drivers on the logistics team like that, and them putting together recommendations that come to you. And then you all decide, obviously, whatever you want in terms of the final decisions. The worst thing in the world would be to have you all, you know, voice things where people think, well, that's off the table now, and squelch, which you never do in that master planning process. So that we would maintain that same listening ear and asking questions and things like that, but not influencing, because as soon as board members say something, then everybody thinks, you know,
Right.
it's done.
I mean,
it's the final
I
decision and the barriers there, or the
Right.
granting approval is already there, as you know.
Right. And so I think it's really important that, you know, in the times that I've been there, a lot of times the board then, when we bring this forward, says, well, has anybody thought about that? And then the person who was in that meeting say, oh yeah, when we were there, we listened to so-and-so say. So it's more of a listening and bringing information to say why a decision, you know, maybe you disagree with it then. Maybe you're like, yeah, well, I didn't like that they said that, but.
Right. Absolutely.
That's the time for us when we come together as a board. So it's just a little different.
Yeah. That's great. Any other questions, since we only have a couple minutes left? Ms. McKittrick, you're okay?
Yeah, no, I think I'm just taking it all in, but I like the idea of being a part, sort of the fly on the wall without, you know, I don't want to, I agree with Lisa, the authority of the board necessarily, but just to be a part of the process.
Sounds good. All right.
All right.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks,
Thank
Ryan.
you. Stay
Thanks,
well,
Ryan.
everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Good.